So, hey to everyone who's hopping on here live. If you're watching a recording of this, you can still comment below or send us a direct message if you have any questions. But today's conversation is one that I hope will resonate with so many of you. It really comes down to thinking about what it really means to honor our hunger and our fullness. I know this is a question that resonates with some people because when we talk about things like intuitive eating and mindful eating, this idea of how can you honor your hunger and honor your fullness can be something that seems very hairy fairy. It doesn't seem tangible to people. So I wanted to provide some context around that and give you three very tangible examples of what that can look like in your life. So, hey to everyone that's jumping on here live. If you're watching this live and you have any questions, you can always comment. I should be able to see them. If you're watching the recording of this, like I said, you should be able to comment below the video. And if you can't for any reason, you can always just send us a direct message at EBWH Community or Enhanced Black Women's Health on Instagram. So, what we want to talk about today is, like I said, 3 points. That talk about like what does it really mean to honor our hunger and our fullness. The first thing that I wanted to make sure we touch upon, and as you'll know, I always bring my notes so I don't go on tangents. But the first thing is how can we truly reject this idea of food rules? And I wanted to think about this first concept because this one is one where it can have different people can feel different emotions around food rules. For some it can feel like restriction, for others it can feel like control. So I want to talk about these 2 points specifically for those of us or those of you, and I'll say us because I've been on both sides of this equation. So for those of us who see food rules as restriction, when you think about rejecting it, you're rejecting this idea that that something outside of yourself is telling you what is good for you, what is not good for you, what works for your body and what doesn't work for your body. So like a tangible example of thinking about like someone rejecting food rules is saying to yourself, when you go grocery shopping, when you go to look at a menu, like let's leave the tangible of looking at a menu. When you go to some restaurant, whether it's a fast food restaurant or it's a sit down, and you look at the menu, and the first thing you start thinking, the immediate question is like, what can I eat? What am I allowed to eat? Right. So that's when you think about rejecting food rules, you move away from this idea of what I'm allowed to do and make the decision to say, what is honoring to me in this moment? Maybe honoring to you in that moment is having the sandwich. Maybe honoring you in that moment is having the salad. Maybe honoring in that moment is having the smoothie. It doesn't really matter which option you choose. It's understanding what does honoring it mean for me in this moment. And then let's talk about the counter, which is people who feel like rejecting food rules will mean they'll be out of control, right? So those of us who have followed rules to the point where it makes us feel comfortable when we have things that this is the list and these are the boundaries that I have, and I can only eat these foods and I have to avoid those foods. That can give us a sense of control, right? For those of us who have ever struggled with binge eating, disordered eating, it makes sense to have these set of rules. And for you, I would really encourage you when you think about rejecting food rules, it's not something that I would necessarily say happens overnight. Like you wake up tomorrow and then there's no rules and can eat whatever you want to eat. That can be very difficult. So with people, when you're making that decision to like relinquish control from the rules and embrace that ability to make your own food choices, it really can be a step-by-step process of just choosing one meal where you have a little bit less control over. For some people, that's their middle meal, their lunch meal. That's the one that they may wing a little bit more. For some people, breakfast and dinner are very stable ones. So being at lunch and saying, okay, I'm going to go out lunch with a friend. And instead of saying we have to go to this restaurant because I need to like go to like a Chipotle because I need to make a bowl and like it has to look like this, making the decision to go to a different type of restaurant. I'm not going to name different brands, but different type of restaurant where there's more variety and more options. And you can slowly say, well, maybe back in the day, I wouldn't have added mustard to my food. I would avoid mayo. I would avoid eggs. I would avoid dietary fats, but I'm going to give myself like this one thing that I'm allowing myself to have. That's when you look away from the food rules. It's giving yourself slow permission to make a different choice than you would otherwise. And like I said, if you have any questions, feel free. And I see some familiar faces jumping in here live. So that's kind of what I think about with the first point of like, what does it look like to really move away from the food rules and kind of move toward embracing food preferences and understanding like you have things that you prefer to eat. For some people, they really do prefer to eat a certain type of grain, certain meats. those are things that are, there's nothing wrong with that. Those are your preferences. Those are things that you genuinely enjoy. And we should be able to eat things that we genuinely enjoy, which will actually go into point number two, which is what it looks like to really honor our hunger and fullness is also embracing that food satisfaction. And what I mean the satisfaction factor when we talk about like eating more intuitively or mindfully is understanding, do you actually even like this thing? Because there was a point, and I know some of you may have experienced this when you have food intolerance or sensitivities, and for instance, dairy, or for some people who choose to like not consume dairy for whatever reasons they want to, you start consuming almond milk or coconut milk or rice milk or all these different things, and you convince yourself that these are somehow better, whether they're better because you think they're healthier, or you're better because they taste better to you, whatever it may be. But then you have this reality of saying, like, okay, maybe for me, who's lactose intolerant, I really can't drink dairy milk, but I don't necessarily have to consume rice milk or pea milk or just if I don't actually enjoy it. Like, where's the satisfaction in that moment? Like, how am I finding foods or ingredients that I truly enjoy? And like I said, that's more of a food intolerance sensitivity. You're avoiding this because you can't really like process that. So you have to find an alternative. But then you have the other satisfaction factor. And I remember a time where I was really into protein powders. And there was this beef protein powder I had found because supposedly it was supposed to be better. It was supposed to be like high protein. It was supposed to be minimally processed, all this trash that they kept telling me this. And here's the thing, I actually despised the taste of it. They had a chocolate flavor, they had a strawberry flavor, they had all these different flavors, and I genuinely did not enjoy this beef protein powder. I was like, this actually tastes disgusting. And at that point, I was like, well, here's the thing. Like, I can be satisfied with an alternate protein powder that tastes better than I would. Maybe it has more sugar, maybe it has, something that tastes good in it. Or I can continue consuming this beef protein powder that I actually despise because it's quote unquote healthier. When you move away from this thinking you have to consume things that are the most nutrient dense, which is important, but not the only thing, and to how can I find things that are satisfying? It's something that you consume long term. It's something that you will enjoy. And when you enjoy the food that you're consuming, you're going to eat it more, right? That's why we often, as health coaches or as nutritionists, as registered dietitians, like we move people toward, yes, more balanced ways of eating. But when I look at balance, it's not just simply like, here's these foods, here are these foods, like let's make it all equal, let's make it the most nutrient dense. For me, balance is also how satisfied are you. Like, if you truly enjoy quinoa more than you enjoy brown rice, then have the quinoa. If you truly enjoy salmon more than you enjoy like bone broth, like have the salmon. Like, just making the decisions and understanding like, hey, where, and those aren't necessarily comparable, I'm just throwing out random examples. But the point is like, how are you finding ways to truly satisfy yourself? Because the satisfaction is part of the eating experience too. And when we are satisfied and we are satiated, that helps with our fullness. Because we can address the hunger by eating things, but we can't necessarily address the fullness if we're not actually taking into account the satisfaction factor, how much you're actually enjoying this, how much are your family enjoying it, right? How much are your kids enjoying it, right? If they're part of the process of you cooking and finding things that all of you enjoy, it makes it so much easier when you're thinking about mealtime. Takes the stress off of your plate trying to like navigate everyone and their daggone food preferences. But it's also one of the things that you don't have to worry about the pushback from yourself or others, because after a while you can, force yourself to consume things that you don't like for a little bit, but over time it becomes more difficult. And then you face the opposite, which we'll talk about in a second, of going to the extreme of either you're choosing eating quote unquote the healthiest or eating completely out of control, right? And for those of us who have bent on the path of feeling more out of control, when we open ourselves up to eating, that's where I think when you're moving away from the food rules, it's really important to dive into the satisfaction, because if you're constantly consuming things that are actually satisfying to you, you're not going to binge on it as much as you think you would. So let's kind of go to this last point, because I'm touching upon it and I want to make sure it's very clear, is, when we think about what really honors our hunger and fullness, it also means breaking up with that binge diet cycle. And what I mean by this is, for those of us who have had this cycle, we know it very well, where we're quote unquote eating healthy for an extremely amount of time. Maybe it's a couple of days, maybe it's a couple of weeks, maybe it's a couple of months. However, you find the fact that you feel controlled during the day when you're performing in front of people, when you're at breakfast, you're at lunch, you're at dinner, you're like really strict, you're counting your calories, you're tracking your macros, you're doing all of that. But as soon as like nighttime comes, if you're a family, you put the kids, the pups, the spouse to bed, and then now you have this time to yourself, and you feel like all hell is about to break loose when it comes to food, because now you've gone from not allowing yourself to consume the things that you want to now, the kitchen is open and you're ready to destroy. Like in those instances, this is not coming from a place of judgment. I have been there. This is why I'm explaining it. It's understanding when we break up with this binge diet cycle, it's understanding that the more you restrict, the more that food becomes desirable. So if I'm constantly restricting myself, which is something I used to do, I used to have this really, really disordered relationship with all types of desserts, to the point that like if a cookie, if an ice cream, if candy was in my house, it was like game off. In the day, I'm stressed out. I'm drinking my wine. I'm having my chocolate. I'm having my ice cream. I'm having whatever sweets are in the house. And what helped me really move away from this dieting binge cycle, as someone who like really focused on a lot of control, was like I said, eating more frequently throughout the day, allowing myself to have that little chocolate in the morning. Even though I was still at that point of counting it because I was still in the cycle of dieting, but hey, we got to start somewhere. So don't judge yourself. But moving away from feeling like I needed to be so controlling to moving toward, okay, I can buy a whole bag of Oreos. However, I don't have to consume this bag of Oreos all in one sitting because it's available to me. And you know what? What I can do if I don't feel control of that, which is something I used to do, is, the Oreo packs have 3 rows. Well, I would keep 1 row for myself. And I had 2 coworkers I used to work with, overnight shifts in security, and I would give them 1 row to one guy, the other row to another woman. And we would all do this for each other over and over again because we all loved Oreos. But this was a way for me to feel more in control, to say, well, I do have this pack of Oreos, but I only have this section. And these other 2 sections are for, I'm just going to use random names. I'm not going to say their names, Terrence and Jasmine. So I'm not going to eat Terrence or Jasmine's cookies. I'm just going to eat my cookies. And I only have this many cookies. So this is the cookies that I'm going to enjoy for the rest of the week. And that's how I got myself from feeling less in control of my food to feeling more in control. Obviously, the goal is to like keep the whole pack and know that you don't have to eat it all. But if you don't feel like you're there yet, which many of us aren't in the beginning of our journey, there's nothing wrong with just getting the small little packs of Oreos, the small little packs of chips or whatever, until you feel comfortable that I can give myself permission to eat. And that's where this last point goes into, is giving yourself that unconditional permission to eat can feel scary in the beginning when you have been very restrictive, when you have been really controlled. But I just want to encourage you that you can get there. You can get to where I was, of like binging on everything inside the house and home, and having such a full belly and then being in extreme pain, to being able to say, like, I can be in a house with like ice cream, cookies, brownies, all of the things that used to be my go-tos, my I did well, so I'm allowed to eat these things. I ran this much, I stayed in the gym this much, I ate so healthy, so I'm allowed to binge. Like all of those thoughts that used to like keep me trapped into believing like the dieting binge cycle was a good thing, to moving toward like, okay, I have unconditional permission to eat this. I can eat this at any time, but you know what? I don't choose to eat this, because it goes back to the second point, satisfaction. I'm satisfied. I'm full. I don't really need this stuff. And it goes back to the first part. I'm not restricting. Like I'm not giving myself rules about when I'm allowed to eat it and when I'm not allowed to eat it. I'm allowed to eat it at any point in time. So I hope that that was a quick and dirty, easy way to kind of think about what it really means to honor your hunger and fullness. It's one of the principles in intuitive eating. I know that can be one of the harder principles for people to kind of understand what does that mean, but I hope we'll do a quick recap of what it can be helpful for you to think about. Number one, like rejecting the food rules, rejecting this idea that there's a certain set of rules that you have to follow all the time, giving yourself that flexibility to bend the rules, giving yourself flexibility to break the rules, and then giving yourself the flexibility to eventually reject the rules, but knowing it can be a process for many of us. The second thing of, embracing that food satisfaction, realizing that there are food preferences that you have, there are flavors, there are things that you really enjoy, and you can include them in a nice, healthy, balanced diet. Like there's nothing stopping you from including them other than the rules that you're giving to yourself and making yourself uphold, right? So being able to really embrace that food satisfaction could help you move away from the restriction, move away from the deprivation, and move away from the binge cycle. And that goes to the last point of, breaking up with the binge dieting cycle. It's something that can be really hurtful for us, harmful for our health overall, but it's also really harmful for our mental health specifically when we're constantly going from dieting to binging, because we feel like we're doing this in secret. We feel like we're hiding a part of ourselves, like we're eating quote unquote healthy and good all day. And then at night, we just lose control. That was my experience. It's not everyone's experience. Some people, it's the opposite. They may feel like they're really in control in the evening, but not in control during the day. Whatever it may look like for you, but knowing that breaking up with that cycle really does start with like giving ourselves that unconditional permission to eat, and understanding that that is a process that can be really difficult. A caveat of this is like, during that process of unconditional permission to eat, I would definitely recommend, if you have a scale in your home, remove it. Like, it can be, if you have tape in your home that you use to like, tape yourself, remove it, because that can also be very triggering for people. Because often when I have worked with clients who go from no permission to giving themselves permission, the moment they step on the scale, they get really, it feels like they need to go back to the binge dieting cycle, because they say to me, Tamisha, I'm gaining weight now. And I'm like, yeah, I know, because you're like eating, but it's not a bad thing. Like, it's normal. So just kind of wanting to give yourself extra permission, if you go to that last point of the unconditional permission to eat and feeling like, well, I'm going to gain weight, Tamisha. You are. Just going to let you know that. I'm not going to lie to you. However, it's often weight that we would have gained naturally if we allowed ourselves to eat anyway. So you're not gaining weight because you're eating per se, eating too much, or you're gaining weight because you were restricting too much. So, which is a different conversation for a different day. So I won't go into a tangent, but just wanted to share those 3 points. I hope that was helpful. If there's any, like I said, questions, follow-up questions, you can always direct message us, let us know. We'll definitely continue doing these different cycles. We tried Saturday today. Normally we do these on Fridays, but wanted to switch it up. So happy to assist. Like I said, we're at the ebwhcommunity.com. If you're not currently a subscriber, make sure you head over there. We love talking about different ways that we can make informed decisions about our health. So we try to provide as much data, research that we find. So thanks for joining, and can't wait to